Dr. John Cowan out of Rome, Georgia, and I'm excited to be here tonight. I am the new chair of U.S. Term Limits for the state of Georgia. U.S. Term Limits is an old organization in this country that has been dedicated to trying to bring back some sense and sensibility into our federal government. And I think now more than ever, we as Georgians and as citizens of the United States realize that our federal government is broken. And what our organization is trying to do is to send a message to Congress and to the Senate that if you guys can't fix your system, the states are going to do it. I had a great conversation with Speaker Ralston a week ago, and he really feels that it is going to be up to the states to heal a lot of the divisions in this union, and I couldn't agree with him more. Our organization is working in all 50 states and at the congressional level to try to bring in some sensible reforms to the terms of our U.S. senators and U.S. representatives. These terms are up for negotiation. There are no hard and fast rules, but the specific initiative we're working on here today is to try to get the state of Georgia to take a small step that will result in a giant leap for this country. And that step is to allow us to participate in a term limits convention. There are currently about 19 states that have already signed on. We would be the 20th. And this would allow us to bring people from all over the United States to discuss how we might limit the terms of U.S. congressmen and U.S. senators. I'm excited to be joined by Senator Cowsert and Representative Beth Camp, who are separately working on this legislation in both of the houses. And I want to distinguish this from the state level, where we as U.S. term limits feel is very important to only address term limits at the national level. Our state representatives, they live in the communities that they directly represent. They are accountable. Many of them have the cell phones of their constituents, and they're held much more accountable than our elected U.S. officials. And so we really feel that to begin to heal some of the wounds and some of the problems of entrenchment and celebrity status of some of these individuals in Washington, D.C., that we need to return it to servant leadership, that you leave your plowshares for a time, go up and serve in the federal government, and then come back home to serve the people in your previous capacity. So with that, I would like to introduce Representative Beth Camp, who will talk about the initiative in more detail. Thank you.
Good afternoon. This is very exciting for me. This is my first press conference, and I'm excited that it is on United States term limits. Being a person who is very supportive of our government, I want to make it clear that it's very important for us to understand the difference between someone who serves 40 days a year, as we do in the Georgia legislature, versus someone who's a full-time person. Albeit they do have home addresses, they in essence live full-time in Washington, D.C., which I'm sure if you lived elsewhere, it'd be very difficult to acclimate and understand exactly what's going on in your home. So the reason term limits are so important, as Dr. Cowan alluded, we have celebrity status. There are some people in Congress that have been serving as long as I've been on earth. And that makes it very challenging when they're not at their home and understanding what it's like to be an American and be a citizen. So that's the reason why I'm supporting term limits. This term limit resolution, which I put forth, is House Resolution 39, and it clearly states that Georgia could take part in a Articles of State Convention where the only thing that could be discussed would be term limits. So it's very limiting in that scope, and it's an opportunity for us to take a step towards taking back our country, making it clear that we're not interested in long-term elected leaders who preside over us. Rather, we want people to represent us. Thank you. I'm so sorry. I'd like to introduce Senator Bill Cowsert.
Thank you, Representative. Well, it's a pleasure to be here today. I thought I might just expound a little bit on the Article 5 amendment process. We're talking about an amendment to the United States Constitution here today because this would be a limit on the term limits of our United States Congress and United States Senate. Article 5 of the United States Constitution sets forth two methods to both propose and ratify amendments to our Constitution. It was intended at the original document that it would need to be amended over time to adapt to changing circumstances and times. Two mechanisms for doing that. One is that the United States Congress, by a 2/3 vote of both the House and the Senate, might propose an amendment to the Constitution and then send that amendment to the states for ratification. It takes 3/4 of the states to ratify any proposed amendment to the Constitution. There's an alternative method, though, that allows the states to apply to Congress to call a convention, an amendment convention, for the limited purpose of proposing amendments to the Constitution. 2/3 of the states would be 34. We're at 19 or 20 now that have proposed called for an amendment convention to deal with this issue of term limits. Georgia needs to get in line with the other states that have already called for it, and we need to keep searching nationwide to come up with 34 states, and then Congress will call the amendment convention. The states, through their joint action, will come up with the proposed amendment and send it back to the states for 3/4 ratification. So it's a unique provision in the U.S. Constitution, rarely used in history, but it's for this type of circumstance where the United States Congress is unlikely to limit their own terms of office. It's not in their self-interest to do that. These men and women that serve in Congress seem to be embedded there. They get in office and they have such inherent advantages of incumbency. I think the stats are somewhere over 94% of incumbents win their elections in Congress. Part of that's because their financial advantage. The special interest will always contribute to the incumbents, those that can help them and have a relationship, and it makes it extraordinarily difficult for any outsider to break in to represent our constituents. So this is the preferred method of amending the U.S. Constitution insofar it applies to the United States Congress's own terms of office. So we are very optimistic that the Georgia legislature will join the other states that have called for this type of convention, and we hope to see progress this year, both in Georgia and in other states. Thank you all for being here today.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Representative. Thank you, Representative Gamble, for being here as well. The other thing I'd like to point out is election reform is at the forefront of this legislative session, and we feel strongly that term limits will allow for Georgia to have comprehensive reform, and that adding this term limit convention call will allow voters to feel comfortable that their elected representatives in the state are trying to not only reform the election process locally and at the state level, but at the federal level as well. And so I'm calling on all other representatives, I'm calling on the governor to add this and consider this part of the meaningful reform that they're trying to pass. And so with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Yeah, Doctor, this is a new format for a while. You feel like it's getting entrenched in Georgia this year? It's still a long way to go, but you feel like you're getting closer?
I think so. I think the events of January 6th and some of the unrest that we've seen in our country, particularly at the federal level, brings this issue to the forefront. When we poll this concept, it overwhelmingly is positive in the 80% of both Democrats and Republicans. I dare say there's any other issue that would unify this country more than if we started talking about term limits at the federal level.
Your ideal term limits as far as both in the House and in the Senate?
That's a great question, and fortunately I probably won't be the one to make that decision. I think that is a misconception of what we're trying to do. We are simply asking to be allowed to have a serious conversation on what that should look like. So we actually have no agenda on our part what those numbers are. I would remind people that Benjamin Franklin, when he wrote the Constitution of the state of Pennsylvania, had term limits built in, and it was a rotate on, rotate off type system. I think something like that might work. There might be caps for consecutive terms, followed by a reprieve, followed by allowing people to serve. I think all options are on the table. What we are simply asking for is the opportunity to have a meaningful discussion at a national level to try to change some of the chronic problems we have in Washington, D.C. Well, with that, thank you for your time, and we appreciate it.